Well, it's amazing. I mean, I literally, I'm not that old, and I literally wrote my first two books when cutting and pasting was scissors and Scotch tape on a roll that would stretch across your cabin floor. You know, but because I write nonfiction and because research is sort of the hallmark of what I do. I mean, I'm completely obsessed with, before I even begin to know something, I need to have every possible fact at my disposal. The internet has transformed my life because, you know, if I'm writing about some obscure valley in the Himalaya, whereas before I might have taken a month to even get an image of it in my head, I can now do that at my fingertips online, which is extraordinary. And the other thing as a researcher that's been transformative is the access to books. I mean, it is completely cost-effective for me to use a library anymore, because for the opportunity costs of going down to the Library of Congress or going to the university library to get books, I can go to abooks.com and have instant access to 50 million books around the world, and they just turn up at my door the next day. So that, in that sense, it's been absolutely transformative. You know, whether my books being on ebooks has sort of extended my audience, I mean, I'm sure it has, but for me it's a little more difficult to know because I make so many films for the National Geographic and I do a great deal of public speaking, and I have a lot of other ways in which I work as a storyteller, so it's difficult to separate them out. But undoubtedly, the availability of the books online is going to eventually help all of us. I think the really interesting thing is how it's going to change the dynamic of being a writer in relationship to a publisher. Because, you know, the old idea that you get a book advance and that, you know, you pay off your book advance with sales against a royalty rate of maybe 10% on your first 5,000, et cetera, et cetera. An awful lot of people are now going directly to sort of self-publishing. And whereas self-publishing at one point almost had a stigma, now it's becoming almost a wise business decision. So I think that's where we're going to see, particularly with Amazon coming into the field of play, an absolute transformation of the delivery of content. But the fascinating thing is that the essence of being a writer is being a storyteller. It's not the paper, it's not the book, it's not the ink. It's do you have a way of telling something important? As Hemingway said, you know, the essence of being a writer is to have lived an interesting life and have something worth telling to the world that the world needs to hear. And that essential art of narrative that goes back to a shaman sitting around a campfire in the Amazon all the way up into the frontier of electronic media, that fundamental is not going to change. There's no longer borders where a writer is sort of defined by the point of his or her birth or constrained by the limits of a domestic industry. I mean, I've never really had that constraint because I've always, from the very beginning, first time I wrote a book, it was a book that sold in 15 languages around the world. So I've never had to worry about those kind of constraints. I've been very fortunate in that regard. You know, people ask, is the internet going to somehow separate you from your fan base? What I've found fascinating is that I do an enormous amount of public speaking. I do 60 or more major talks to audiences from 500 to 4,000 a year. And what I find interesting is that whole business, which seems on the surface so archaic, a single individual walking out to a podium, standing behind a podium, and talking for an hour to a house of 1,000, 2,000 people, you would have thought that form of communication would have gone the way of, the horse and buggy, or books, It hasn't, because people want that straight contact, and so I think that we'll see that the internet will augment our ability to tell stories, but it won't fundamentally displace the desire of readers or consumers of books of stories to have some kind of personal interaction with the author, which is, I think, something authors also enjoy.